Hello and welcome to the Storm of Scripture. Today we are going to walk through the shortest chapter in the book of Revelation, Revelation chapter 15. Even though this chapter has only 8 verses, it has imagery that is as powerful as any found throughout the book of Revelation. It introduces us to a time of transition in heaven. 3 significant transitions are symbolized by imagery in Revelation 15. The first is a transition to the time of the end, the very last phase of God's unfolding story of bringing justice on earth, symbolized by 7 angels who will pour out the very last judgments on earth, especially on the kingdom of the beast. It is also an interesting time of transition for the divine council. It will incorporate the martyrs who have died in Christ, specifically those who have died in the kingdom of the beast. We see them gathered in heaven in the very same spot where we saw the divine council sit in Revelation chapters 4 and 5. The chapter ends with a picture of the heavenly temple being so filled with the glory of God that not even the angelic beings can enter it in order to minister. This, I believe, is a symptom of the fact that we are transitioning to the time when heaven and earth are joined together as one. Thank you for joining me as we walk through Revelation chapter 15, verses 1 through 8. Let's just start with the first verse, Revelation 15:1. And I saw another great and marvelous sign in heaven, 7 angels having 7 plagues that are the last ones, because with them the wrath of God is completed. Now, John is going to move on to other things for several verses before he's going to come back around to these 7 angels. He has setting us up here with the first verse of this chapter to just emphasize that we are entering the final phase. The word there, the Greek for the last ones, the 7 plagues that are the last ones, that's the same root as our word eschatology, the study of last things. Those 7 plagues are going to be it. This sets them apart from anything we've read before, apart from the seals, apart from the trumpets, apart from anything that has come before, because here John tells us this is it. After these 7 plagues, there will be no more plagues of this same nature. Now, once the 7th plague has come, it is not necessarily the end of the story, but it is the end of any sort of plague of that nature. There's not going to be another set of 7 after that. It's going to be moving on to the final eternal state. No more cycles. He does say that these 7 angels are a great and marvelous sign in heaven. John has used that phrasing only a couple of times before, and both times at the beginning of chapter 12. He describes the woman clothed with the sun and with the moon under her feet as a great sign in heaven. And he describes the fiery red dragon that is trying to devour the child and kill the woman also as a sign in heaven. I suggested when we were going through those first few verses of chapter 12 that may be because these are astral prophecy, references to constellations, and using those constellations as a means of telling a story about God's unfolding plan. If that's the case, then the woman clothed with the sun and with the moon under her feet would most logically be the constellation Virgo, the only constellation of basically simply a woman standing. And then the dragon would be the constellation Hydra, which is in proximity to Virgo and could be seen as threatening her or a child that she might bear. If those 2 are indeed constellations, then it may be that these 7 angels, which is another great and marvelous sign in heaven, could be the Pleiades, the only group of 7 stars with a special name in the constellations. The Pleiades are associated with judgment. At the end of Revelation chapter 1, around verse 12 in describing the glorified Son of Man. We talked about the Pleiades because the glorified Son of Man has 7 stars in his hand. And so a reference to 7 stars in that context may also point to the Pleiades, as the Pleiades are associated in the ancient world, especially in ancient Israel, with God's judgment. After mentioning these 7 angels, as I said, John then turns away from them. He says that he sees a sea of glass. Let's look at Revelation chapter 15, verse 2. And I saw something like a sea of glass mixed with fire, and those who had conquered the beast and his image and the number of his name were standing by the glassy sea, holding harps from God. This description of something like a sea of glass is not introduced for the first time here in chapter 15. It's actually part of the divine council worship that is described in chapters 4 and 5. He sets that up in chapter 4, verse 6 by describing it this way. And before the throne was something like a sea of glass, like crystal. And in the midst of the throne and around the throne were 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and back. Several elements are going to pop up here in chapter 15 that were introduced for the first time in chapters 4 and 5. Here's chapter 5, verses 8 through 10. When he took the scroll, and that is the Lamb, when the Lamb took the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each one of whom had a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And they were singing a new song, saying, You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slaughtered and bought people for God by your blood from every tribe and language and people and nation, and made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they will reign on the earth. I just want to take us back to a graphic that I introduced when we were talking about this divine council worship scene in chapter 4. We have the throne at the very center of all of what's described. Around that throne are the 4 living creatures, here represented by the wings that they have. In front of the throne is the sea of glass. There are the 7 torches of fire, and then the 24 elders are all sitting on 24 thrones all around them. But that sea of glass is right there in the throne room, in the presence of God and before him. So anything that is going to be arranged near this sea of glass is going to be in this same vicinity, near the throne, with the living creatures, and presumably with the 24 elders. Though in chapter 15, we will see something a little different, because around the sea of glass are not the 24 elders, but those who had conquered the beast and his image and the number of his name. These are the ones who are there, standing by the glassy sea. These who had conquered the beast and his image and the number of his name. I believe these would be the Christians, specifically those who had been martyred during the reign of this final beast that arose in chapter 13. We could read those 3 elements. First, the beast himself. Second, his image. And third, the number of his name, as just 3 ways of referring to the same kind of thing. But I don't think they are. I believe there are nuances between each of these 3 things, because the persecution of Christians is mentioned explicitly in association with each one of these 3 things in a slightly different way. Here's what I mean by that. When we're talking about the beast himself, then we're back in Revelation 13, verse 7. Just the first part of that verse is relevant to this. It was given to the beast from the sea to make war with the saints and to conquer them. What would it mean to conquer the saints? They're not going to bend to the beast's authority. More than likely, to conquer them is code for killing them. Then there's the image. In Revelation 13:15, we read, It was given to the beast from the earth to put breath into the image of the beast. That's the beast from the sea. In order that the image of the beast both spoke and caused that all those, unless they worship the image of the beast, should be killed. So this is a different nuance. It's not merely that they are conquered by the beast. They refuse to bow down to his political power and therefore are killed. But here, those who refuse to worship the image of the beast are killed. So it's refusing to bow down to his spiritual authority, refusing that religion of the beast is in view when it references the image. And then the number of his name. Well, the number of his name was what was put on people's wrists and on their foreheads in Revelation 13:17. No one was able to buy or to sell except the one who had the mark, the name of the beast or the number of his name. That's the mark of the beast that was put on foreheads or on hands. If you didn't have the mark, then you were unable to buy or sell, which would have been economic suicide not to take the sign of the beast. You wouldn't be able to get food or anything else that you would need to live if you didn't take this mark. And the Christians didn't. The Christians would not take the mark, and so they died perhaps of starvation or exposure or whatever else might have come about from being unable to participate in the economic system of the beast. They would refuse to worship the image of the beast, and so they would die for not falling into line with their worship of the beast. And they simply would not bow to the beast's political power and would be conquered / killed by the beast for that as well. All three of these are slightly different nuances, but they are ways in which the Christians are refusing to show loyalty to the beast and insisting on showing loyalty to Christ. And there's the ironic use of the word conquer, in that the beast conquers the Christians by killing those who refuse to be loyal to him, but then it's the Christians who conquer the beast by dying rather than compromising their loyalty to Jesus. The irony is that when the beast kills the Christian, the beast has conquered in his own way, and the Christian has conquered in his way in that very same act. I think that's pictured quite poetically in Revelation 12:11. We already examined this verse with regard to the dragon, because this is in fact a statement by the voice from heaven about those who conquered the dragon, but it seems equally applicable to the Christians conquering the beast. They conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives until death. This is what it meant to conquer evil. But unfortunately for the martyrs, conquering evil meant dying. And yet, what do we see? We see these conquered and yet conquering Christians rejoicing by the side of the crystal sea, by the glassy sea in heaven. They are there alive in heaven, worshiping God in his very presence. We might read back into this whole scene in Revelation 15, what we saw described in Revelation 7 with those who were worshiping in the presence of God before his throne in that chapter. I'd like to revisit Revelation 7, verses 13 through 15. One of the elders answered, saying to me, "These who are dressed in the white robes, who are they, and from where have they come?" And I said to him, "My Lord, you know." And he said to me, "These are the ones who have come out of the great tribulation and have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Because of this, they are before the throne of God, and they serve him day and night in his temple. And the one who is seated on the throne will shelter them." I think there are two ways to come out of the great tribulation. One of them is to survive it at great personal cost and difficulty, but to survive it. But the other is to die a martyr during it. Just like those who conquer the beast are the ones who died refusing to be disloyal to Christ, I believe those who come out of the great tribulation are those who have died refusing to be disloyal to Christ. So the picture of Revelation 7 and the picture of Revelation 15 are parallel. Not that I'm saying they describe the same group of people, but I think they describe the same phenomenon. Those who are loyal to Christ, who die because of that loyalty, are vindicated because of that loyalty, and are before the Lord, before God, worshiping him and sheltered by him and blessed by him. It is the promise that loyalty to Christ will give you eternal blessing, even though you die during your persecution. What are these martyrs doing in Revelation 15? Well, we read that in Revelation 15, verses 3 and 4. They were singing the song of Moses, the slave of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, "Great and marvelous are your works, Lord God, all-powerful. Righteous and true are your ways, King of the ages. Who would never fear, Lord, and glorify your name? For only you are holy, because all the nations will come and worship before you, because your righteous deeds have been revealed." First thing I want to point out is that this is not two songs. It's a song that connects Moses with Jesus, who is the Lamb. Revelation reflects the tension that there is between Jews and Gentile believing Christians, in that we have in chapter 7 the 144,000 who are said to be specifically of the tribes of Israel, and then the great crowd, which is said to be of all the nations, people from all the nations and tribes and languages. So we have what appear to be two different groups, although I think the implication within chapter 7 is that they are all sealed by God. They are all God's people. And the great crowd that includes all the nations certainly includes the Jews as part of the fellowship in front of the throne of God. But there is still something of a distinction to be found there. But Revelation, while acknowledging that distinction, also asserts that everyone who is faithful to God, whether Jew or Gentile, is part of God's family, and that there is no distinction of merit and no distinction of favor between Jew and Gentile. And so the song of Moses and the song of the Lamb is the same song, because they are not opposed to one another and they are not against each other. They are one, all faithful to God together. There is no song or psalm from the Old Testament that uses the words described here as part of this song of Moses and song of the Lamb. Though there are some places in the Old Testament where some of the phrases do show up. The most likely song of Moses that's being alluded to here in Revelation 15 is the song from Exodus 15. I'd like to read some select verses from Exodus 15 and the song that Moses sings, Moses and all the Israelites sing in that chapter. Exodus 15, I'm going to start with verse 1 and then skip a few, and I'll mention which verse I'm reading as I read along. First verse, "Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to Yahweh, and they said, 'Let me sing to Yahweh, because he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he hurled into the sea.'" And verse 6, "Yahweh, your right hand is glorious in power. Yahweh, your right hand destroyed the enemy." Verse 11, "Who is like you among the gods, Yahweh? Who is like you, glorious in holiness, awesome in praiseworthy actions, doing wonders?" Verse 13, "In your loyal love you led the people whom you redeemed. In your strength you guided them to the abode of your holiness." Verse 14, "The peoples heard, they trembled. Anguish seized the inhabitants of Philistia." Verse 16, "Terror and dread fell on them. At the greatness of your arm, they became silent like the stone, until your people passed by, Yahweh, until the people whom you bought passed by." Verse 17, "You brought them and planted them on the mountain of your inheritance, a place you made for yourself to inhabit, Yahweh, a sanctuary, Lord, that your hands established." Finally, verse 18, Yahweh will reign as king forever and ever. You can already hear a few echoes from this song in what the people are saying in Revelation 15. Who is like you, glorious in holiness, awesome in praiseworthy actions, doing wonders? And that was referenced in Revelation 15, 3 and 4 about his wondrous and marvelous works, and asking a question, who would never fear, Lord, and glorify your name? This is like the question, who is like you? And of course, his righteous deeds, in which in Exodus 15 is mentioned the praiseworthy actions of God. But there is a psalm that may be even closer to the idea of a song that's both of Moses and of the Lamb, because this psalm connects the Egyptian Exodus with the ultimate judgment at the end of time. That would be Psalm 98. Psalm 98 could be a song of both Moses and the Lamb. I'm just going to read the psalm, listen for some of those echoes, both of Exodus 15 and Revelation 15. Sing to Yahweh a new song, for he has done wonders. His right hand and his holy arm have secured his victory. Yahweh has made known his salvation. To the eyes of the nations he has revealed his righteousness. He has remembered his loyal love and his faithfulness to the house of Israel. All the ends of the earth have seen the salvation of our God. Shout joyfully to Yahweh, all the earth. Be cheerful and sing for joy, and sing praises. Sing praises to Yahweh with lyre and melodious sound, with trumpets and sound of horn. Shout joyfully before the King, Yahweh. Let the sea with its fullness roar, the world and those who live in it. Let the rivers clap their hands. Let the hills sing joyfully together before Yahweh, for he is coming to judge the earth. He will judge the world with righteousness and the peoples with equity. Notice that it begins with references to the holy arm of Yahweh doing wonders and revealing his righteousness. This is something straight from Exodus 15. But the end of Psalm 98 points to his ultimate day of the Lord. He is coming to judge the earth. That was not what happened in Exodus 15, but that is what is about to happen in Revelation 15, that ultimate judgment of all the earth. After John describes hearing the song of those who are standing by the glassy sea, then he records when he sees those seven angels. I don't know whether he's seeing them again or whether verse 1 was simply an introductory verse that was putting us in mind of the seven angels. He says he saw them, but then he doesn't say anything else about them until here in Revelation 15, verses 5 and 6. After these things I looked, and the temple, the tent of the testimony in heaven, was opened, and the seven angels who had the seven plagues came out from the temple, dressed in clean, bright linen garments, and girded with golden belts around their chests. This is the second time that John says the temple opens. Here he says the temple is the tent of the testimony in heaven. That tent of the testimony would be the tabernacle. So John is explicitly equating the tabernacle of Moses with the temple of Solomon and saying that what is in heaven is both of them, like all together. It is the temple and the tent. It is the place in heaven that represents the same kind of thing as the tabernacle did and the temple after that. And he says it opens. Where he mentioned that before was at the end of chapter 11, the very last verse in Revelation 11. And the temple of God in heaven was opened, and the ark of his covenant appeared in his temple, and there were lightnings and sounds and thunders and an earthquake and large hail. Revelation 11:19. Right before the major break, when at the beginning of chapter 12 is the very next verse, which talks about the great and wondrous sign in heaven with the woman clothed with the sun. This verse, Revelation 11:19, that talks about the temple of heaven opening, is described as part of the seventh trumpet that occurs at the end of chapter 11. And the seventh trumpet is a kind of summary description of what's going to start happening with Revelation chapter 13, with the rise of the beast and the judgments that come and everything that's going to happen. The judgment of the dead is described at the end of chapter 11. I think that seventh trumpet blowing in chapter 11 opens up descriptions that are like everything happening all at once. The end has come, and that seventh trumpet is introducing it. Even though the temple of God in heaven is opening at the end of chapter 11, I think it may be describing the same event that we're reading is happening in chapter 15, verses 5 and 6. It's not a separate opening up of the temple, but we had a kind of rush of images of all kinds coming at us when the seventh trumpet sounds in Revelation 11. And I think we're seeing those events play out in more real time, step-by-step time, in Revelation 13 and following. I think that the temple of God opening in Revelation 15 is the same thing as the temple of God opening in Revelation 11:19, not a different opening of the temple. When the temple does open, John says in verse 6, he sees these angels dressed in clean, bright linen garments and girded with golden belts around their chests. We don't often get a description of what people are wearing. If we trace it back, there are not a lot of people dressed in linen clothing, and especially not with gold around their chests. But we see a couple of places where this is described. The two places where we see somebody wearing linen with gold at their waist would be in Daniel 10, verse 5. Daniel says, he lifted up my eyes, and I saw, and there was a man, and he was dressed in linen, and his waist was girded with the gold of Uphaz. Now this man that he sees is hovering over the Tigris River. The glorified man that Daniel sees in Daniel 10 is a picture of the angel of the Lord. It could be a Christophany in the Old Testament, meaning Christ, the second person of the Godhood, showing up as an angel, the angel of the Lord. We see a similar description in Revelation chapter 1 of the glorified Son of Man amongst the lampstands. Now, we don't hear the detail about the robe he's wearing, but in Revelation 1:13 we read, in the midst of the lampstands, one like a son of man was dressed in a robe reaching to the feet and girded around his chest with a golden belt. So the closest connection we have is the golden belt around his chest, like the golden belt girding the man in Daniel 10, and like these seven angels in Revelation 15. White robes with a golden belt as his representatives, as Christ's representatives, going to pour out God's wrath. In Revelation 15, verse 7, one of the four living creatures gave to the seven angels 7 golden bowls full of the wrath of God, who lives forever and ever. Notice we have another detail that's similar to what we saw in Revelation chapter 4. The 4 living creatures. They're apparently all accounted for, but only one of them is giving to the 7 angels the golden bowls. So one of these 4 living creatures collects 7 bowls. Where would he get those bowls from? Well, all 24 of the elders that were sitting around the throne had golden bowls full of the prayers of the saints. That may be where they got them. If I were to lay odds on which one of the 4 is the one who gave the bowls to the 7 angels, I would vote on the very first one it's mentioned, the first one that had a head like a lion, and that was positioned to the east of the throne, because that one represents powers to the east, and I believe that what we're talking about is Babylon. Babylon was represented in some architecture as a lion with wings. Let's read Revelation 4, 6 through 8. Before the throne was something like a sea of glass, like crystal, and in the midst of the throne and around the throne were 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and back. And the first living creature was similar to a lion, and the second living creature was similar to an ox, and the third living creature had a face like a man's, and the fourth living creature was similar to an eagle flying. And the four living creatures, each one of them had 6 wings apiece, full of eyes around and inside, and they do not have rest day and night, saying, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God all-powerful, the one who was, and the one who is, and the one who is coming. So this living creature happens to look like a symbol for Babylon by being a lion with wings. I think this is just one more echo of the fact that we're talking about Babylon. And when the flying angel in chapter 14 says, Fallen is Babylon, it's just connecting the dots for a pattern of Babylon as this place where the beast is going to reign. Now back to those 7 bowls. Where do the 7 bowls come from? Well, this isn't the first time we saw golden bowls either. And golden bowls were actually a routine part of the temple worship process. There were bowls that they used for pouring out wine and other liquids onto the altar as part of their sacrifices. They used bowls for various reasons, all in the temple. So having golden bowls was not unusual, but these golden bowls were uniquely temple items. They were not something you'd have in your own home. They were not common outside of the temple, but they were used in the temple. Exodus 25:29 describes the fact that golden bowls were a part of what was necessary for temple worship. In Exodus 25:29, it says, You will make its plates and its ladles and its pitchers and its bowls with which libations will be poured of pure gold, and of pure gold you will make them. Standard temple product, the golden bowl. But in Revelation 5:8, we found that golden bowls were already in the temple of heaven because the elders held them. In Revelation 5:8, we read, When he took the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each one of them had a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. Those bowls make an indirect appearance in Revelation 8. In Revelation 8:3, we read, Another angel who had a golden censer came and stood at the altar, and a large amount of incense was given to him, in order that he could offer the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar that is before the throne. Where did the incense come from? It must have come from the golden bowls, because that's where the incense is described in chapter 5. So these golden bowls have been sort of there in the background ever since Revelation chapter 5 and in chapter 8. And here, this golden bowls are given to these 7 angels, but they're not full of just the prayers of all the saints. Here they are full of the wrath of God. Where did the wrath of God come from? Is it just an abstraction? I don't think so. The golden bowls in the temple would hold one of 2 things, either incense, like the golden bowls that the 24 elders had, full of the incense of the prayers of the saints, or with wine, and they would be poured out on the altar as part of a process of worship. But here they are full of the wrath of God, and I think we are to read that as a wine. Let's go all the way back to the Old Testament for the first reference of such a thing. In Jeremiah 25, verse 15, we read, For thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, to me, Take this cup of the wine of wrath from my hand, and you must give it to all the nations to whom I am sending you to drink. Now that is the image that is percolating behind Revelation 14:10, when one of the flying angels says of the ones who are loyal to the beast, he himself also will drink of the wine of the anger of God that has been mixed full strength in the cup of his wrath, and will be tortured with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. In chapter 14, verse 19, we read about the harvest of the grapes that produced this wine of the anger of God. Revelation 14:19 says, And the angel swung his sickle to the earth and harvested the vine of the earth and threw the grapes into the great wine press of the wrath of God. That is the source of the judgment that is going to flow out of these bowls. It's not just an image for its own sake. At the end of chapter 14, it's explaining where this wrath is coming from that is filling the bowls that the angels are going to pour out. At the end of chapter 15, in verse 8, we read this, "And the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power, and no one was able to enter into the temple until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were completed." One would think the people in heaven would be accustomed to the glory of God, being in his presence at all times, but there does seem to be a special filling of the temple with the glory of God at this point. In order to try to find an explanation for why the temple would be filled here in Revelation 15:8, I looked back into the Old Testament for when it was that the priests would be unable to enter into either the tabernacle or the temple. There are key places where that actually happens. The first one is in Exodus chapter 40, verses 33 through 35, when the tabernacle is just finished. We read this. "He set up the courtyard all around the tabernacle and the altar, and he put up the screen of the gate of the courtyard, and Moses completed the work. And the cloud covered the tent of assembly, and the glory of Yahweh filled the tabernacle. And Moses was unable to go into the tent of assembly because the cloud settled on it, and the glory of Yahweh filled the tabernacle." So here's a very similar kind of situation to what we read about in Revelation 15:8, only in Exodus 40, it's Moses and presumably anybody else being unable to go into the tent of assembly because of the glory of Yahweh, the glory of God, filling it. But that's not the only time that such an event happened. It also happened when Solomon finished his temple in 1 Kings. In 1 Kings chapter 8, verses 10 and 11, we read, "When the priests went out from the holy place, the cloud filled the house of Yahweh. The priests were not able to stand to minister because of the presence of the cloud, for the glory of Yahweh filled the house of Yahweh." So at the commissioning of the tabernacle and at the commissioning of the temple, the glory of Yahweh filled the house and no one was able to go in. But there's one more situation that I think is relevant. And although it doesn't mention people being unable to go into the temple, it does mention the temple being filled with the presence of the cloud and the glory of Yahweh. And that's in Ezekiel. This, I think, is the most directly relevant, although it's a part of a pattern, as we've seen with Exodus 40 and 1 Kings 8. Ezekiel 10, verses 3 and 4, and then there's some other descriptions of things happening, but then the end of this idea comes in chapter 11, verses 22 and 23. So I'm just going to read those together here. Ezekiel 10, 3 and 4 say, "Now the cherubim were standing on the south of the temple when the man went." That's an angel that was sent by God. "And the cloud filled the inner courtyard, and the glory of Yahweh rose up from on the cherub toward the threshold of the house, and the house was filled with the cloud, and the courtyard was filled with the brightness of the glory of Yahweh." This is very similar description to what happened with both the tabernacle and the temple during their commissioning. But what's happening here in Ezekiel 10 and 11 is the decommissioning of the Temple of Solomon, because the Spirit of Yahweh is about to leave for good. And that's described in chapter 11, verses 22 and 23. "Then the cherubim lifted up their wings, and their wheels were beside them, and the glory of the God of Israel was over them. And the glory of Yahweh went up from the midst of the city, and it stood still on the mountain that is to the east of the city." The mountain that is to the east of the city would be the Mount of Olives. And this is describing the glory of Yahweh leaving Jerusalem, pausing on the Mount of Olives, and then presumably continuing on to the east. This is significant because Ezekiel himself and many of the refugees that were taken into exile are in the east. So the Spirit of God is actually going to where the people of God are, leaving the city of Jerusalem to go be with the people. So it's a significant shift, but this is the decommissioning of the Temple of Solomon as sacred space. So when the glory of God is specifically said to fill the tabernacle or to fill this courtyard in Ezekiel, to fill the place in such a way as for people to be unable to do anything in there or even to enter it, it happens at the commissioning of the tabernacle, at the commissioning of the temple, and at the decommissioning of the temple. I believe that the temple in heaven is filled with the cloud of God's glory because it too is being decommissioned by God. In the very near future, heaven and earth are going to be joined together as one. If the tabernacle and the temple on earth were sacred space, carved out as a place for the people on earth to reach up into heaven and find some connection to God, and the temple in heaven was a place where the prayers of the saints could be heard and where the Ark of the Covenant could be found because the covenant connecting God to his people through covenant was there. That's all going to be unnecessary on earth and in heaven. Why? Because earth and heaven are going to be joined together as one. There does not need to be any particular space in either place in order for one to reach towards the other because they'll be all in one place. God will be with his people in their very presence. He will not need a temple in heaven, and there will not be a need for a temple on earth. We will all be in close proximity to one another. All space will be sacred space. Thank you again for joining me in our walk through the book of Revelation. I hope you'll make a comment here on YouTube and let me know what you think of this idea that we are transitioning to the point where heaven and earth are one. I'd also love to hear you over on Facebook in this Storm of Scripture discussion group. Until we meet again to examine the treasures in the biblical text, may the Lord be with you.